charming and someone that everyone likes, you know, like John. But there's also a good bit of technique involved, and if you're doing the technique correctly, then you'll be more successful. And if you're not doing the technique correctly, you're unlikely to be successful. And oddly, the technique didn't seem to be taught anywhere. So I put this course together based on the stuff that I've seen work and not. And in this sense, successful selling is a lot like successful tennis or successfully playing the violin. If you're not using the right technique, your odds of success are low. But the technique can be learned. So it's not some black art that you're either born with or not. It is learnable and it is teachable. The other point I'd like to make is that you may or may not see yourself going forward and becoming a professional salesperson. However, whether you do or not, guaranteed there will be times in your life, and not just a few, when you will need to get the attention of someone who you don't already know in order to do something that you want to do. And that might be, you might have a great idea for a new product or process or a better way to approach customers or something, and the person you need to convince about that is 3 levels up and 2 divisions over in the company you work for, and nobody who you know knows that person, so you can't get an introduction, and you just need to go and approach that person. Or you might at some point want to approach your congressman to get something straightened out or whatever. But there are lots of times in life where having really good technique for approaching people whom you don't already know can be really valuable. So that's what this excerpt is primarily about. Doing that both in voice and using primarily voicemail, and in digital form using email or text messages or whatever we morph into in the future. Okay, so I'm gonna move on here. And John, am I right that people are seeing me move from page to page? Is that what's happening?
Should be. Yeah. If anybody can't, just let us know. But they should be able to see your screen.
Okay. What I've got up now is page 3, the introduction. That kind of says in writing what I just said, so you can read that at your leisure. And here's what we're going to go over today. Number one that I already covered, why should you care about selling? I'm going to talk a little bit about how sales training is traditionally done, and then I'm going to talk about the stuff I developed, which is establishing a dialogue with your prospect or with the person you need to reach, voicemail, email, and so on. Okay, so
hey, Jim.
Yep.
Just a quick suggestion. If you can essentially, I think you can enlarge the useful part of the screen by minimizing the toolbars that you have up there, or take it to 100%. But it's, if you give it a little bit more room there, I think we might be able to see it a little bit better. Maybe I'm the only one with that problem, but.
How would I do that? Can someone
all the way to the right, and where the review, right there, just go right straight to the right, all the way to the right, and then that up arrow, the caret there, I think if you press on that, it'll get rid of, there you go, get it a little bit more room.
Okay. Okay, and I'll blow it up a little bit.
There you go.
Better?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the traditional steps in the sales process, a great deal of sales training, and I would say almost all of it, is based on these steps. And when you're approaching someone, these steps are 1 through 7, which you can read, are kind of the sequence of events that happen as you lead, hopefully, onto a sale. These grew out of some work that IBM and Xerox professional selling skills courses were developed in the 70s, and they were developed at the time because sales back then was very chaotic. No two people seemed to do it the same, and IBM and Xerox realized that they were losing a lot of efficiency because the same words didn't mean the same things in different contexts. So they basically came out with these programs they put all their people through. And initially, they were a real advantage because the rest of the sales world was so chaotic, and IBM and Xerox did very well. What happened over time was their instructors realized they could make more money selling these secrets outside the companies than by staying on board. So they left and started their own sales training companies, and those companies survive to this day. And the best known ones are down here in the fifth bullet. But what's important about these techniques is that not much has changed in the way that these are trained. And so if you were to take a course from one of these companies today, you'd get essentially the same thing. What you would not get is the tactics that you need in order to move from one step to the other. I liken these steps in the sales process to sort of the view from 10,000 feet, but you're not going to win the battle at 10,000 feet. You need to get down on the ground and engage with the customer, and these methodologies don't teach that. And that was what I had a couple of courses that taught these things. John, you probably did too. And you come out of the course kind of scratching your head, thinking, "Well, that's nice to know, but it doesn't help me very much." So in your career, if you have the opportunity to take any sales training, you might look at it and make sure that it's not simply steps in the sales process, because once you've seen that, seeing it again doesn't help much. Okay, whenever you need to get in touch with somebody you don't already know, there are basically two ways to do it. You can either call them up, or you can, one way or another, write them. And we're going to talk a little bit about voicemail first. People of influence have not routinely answered their phone really in our lifetime, and so it's always been hard to get them on the phone. Now, back when John and I were pups, even moderately important people had other humans answering their phones. They were administrative assistants or secretaries or one title or another, but colloquially they were known as gatekeepers, and their job was to keep annoying calls away from the important person you're trying to reach. And in this context, the accepted wisdom was to charm the gatekeeper. And if I had thought long enough in advance to send these out to you so you could have them in print, I would suggest you write that in there. But that's what goes in on this line of the workbook. But this is kind of obsolete, because today almost no one has someone answering their phone. Maybe the president of Boeing does, and probably the president of the United States, but very few other people. And so today everybody's got voicemail, and almost everybody's got caller ID. And so the people you're calling can be very selective about who they talk to and how they talk to them. So these clever ideas that used to be taught, such as calling early in the morning or late in the day, or calling over lunch, or calling their cell phone or calling them at home, they really don't work well anymore, although they're still taught in a lot of courses. One thing in particular to avoid is the second bullet there, calling over and over, hoping that the person you're trying to reach will at some point pick up the phone, and then you can talk to them live, but never leaving a voicemail. You know, with caller ID, it's obvious who the person is who's calling, and anybody who calls over and over again, you know, in a lot of jurisdictions that qualifies as stalking, and in any case, it's not a very good way to launch a relationship. So the reality is, if you want to reach new prospects, we really need to have a good voicemail strategy. And since we have all these obstacles in our path, mostly technology obstacles, we might as well have the voicemail ready the first time we call, because 9 times out of 10, when you call somebody who's busy, what you're going to get is their voicemail. That's just how the world works. So when I'm teaching this class in person, I ask for a show of hands. What do you think your success rate is in generating a return call when you know the person you're calling? Well, most people say, well, it's probably 90-100% because it's a friend or it's someone I know. So that's probably right. What about when you have an introduction to the person you're calling but you don't know them? For example, you can say, well, our mutual friend John Reynolds suggested that I call you about X, Y, and Z. That's a good entree. We call that a warm call. And in general, people think, if you have a warm call, you probably get connected about 50% of the time. And the third question there, what about if you have no introduction at all and you don't know the person, which we call a cold call? Everybody agrees that the batting average on that situation is pretty low. And in fact, when surveys are done, as they are from time to time, the average response rate on that of actually connecting with someone you don't know in a cold call situation is down around 2, 3, 4, 5%. So it's quite low. It's so low it's hardly worth doing. What I do when I'm teaching this live is I do this voicemail exercise, and I want to do it here too because it's just very effective in pointing out the problem that we're dealing with. I'd like you all to imagine that you're trying to reach some busy executive, me for example, whether in your company or in a customer situation, and you get my voicemail. I want you to take just 90 seconds here and write down what it is you would say to me when you reach my voicemail. And please do it verbatim because we're going to circle back and ask a couple of you to read them out loud. The situation is you call me up and you get my voicemail, and it goes something like, "This is Jim Russell, and you've reached my voicemail box. Please leave a message so I can return your call." Beep. Okay, and then please write down what you would say. Take 90 seconds. Ten more seconds. Okay, leave wherever you've got there and let's move on. Question, why do busy people respond to us at all? If they're so busy, how could what we have to say to them possibly be important enough to take them away from their work? Well, it turns out there are 2 reasons, and it's fortunate for us there aren't 17 reasons to understand and remember, but there are really only 2. And the first reason is obligation. And I ask people to write that in there so they remember it. And examples of this are when you get calls from bosses or customers or your dealers or family or friends or colleagues. There's an obligation there, whether professional or social. And whenever you get a call from your spouse or your boss or a customer, you return that call because you have an obligation to do that. Probably the Internal Revenue Service would also imply an obligation, or the local police station. So we all understand that, but here's the question for you. How many people are going to feel obligated to return an unsolicited call from someone they don't know, and especially if it looks like that person is trying to sell them something? And the answer to that is, not very many people are going to feel that obligation. And so if that's the circumstance and you are that person making the call, then relying on obligation to get a return call is a pretty weak strategy and not likely to succeed. But fortunately, there's another reason people respond, and that reason is curiosity. Curiosity, and I ask people to write that in there on line 2. And curiosity is a very powerful stimulus, and it's baked into our genes. We can't help but be curious. And if you think about all the travails that Homo sapiens has endured to get to where we are today, it was probably pretty important to be curious for the caveman walking down the trail who heard a stick break in the woods off to the side. It was really important to know whether that was an enemy who might try to kill him, or an animal that might try to eat him, or an animal that maybe he could eat, or maybe the object of his affection who was just waiting for him. very different actions would be implied, and you're not going to know which one until you ferret out what caused that sound. So we are instinctively very curious. There are ways to elicit curiosity, to provoke curiosity in a first meeting with a person, even if it's not in real time, such as in a voicemail or we'll see later in email. And here are some ways that we can foster it. We can offer something new and exclusive that the person we're connecting with has not seen or heard before. We can offer something that has potentially some value. The third one here is a little bit counterintuitive. It's partial information. One way to extinguish curiosity is to provide so much information about the thing you want to talk about that the person on the other end can determine that they don't need to pursue that they don't need to call you back in order to get more information, that you've already given them enough. Another one that isn't very obvious is by asking questions rather than making statements. By asking the person whether it would make sense for us to connect, or whether that something might be interesting to them, rather than saying, this should be really interesting to you because it can help you in all these ways. Putting it in a question form is much more effective at piquing curiosity. And finally, by being very specific rather than generic, because specificity breeds relevance and that engenders curiosity. So that's those are tools we can use. We'll talk about using them in a minute. And one of the homework assignments I'm giving you is to approach somebody, approach a friend in the next few days who would not get angry by feeling tricked or duped a little bit, and just touch them on the shoulder and say, hey Bill, guess what? And when you say that, watch very closely what happens. They will stop whatever they're doing. They will turn and look at you. Their eyes will get big, and you will have their complete undivided attention, while their curiosity takes over other things that are on their mind, and while they wait for the answer to that riddle. Now, you won't have it forever, but you will for a brief second. And that's illustrative of how powerful a factor curiosity is to humans. So that's one of your homework assignments. On to the next page. So we've been talking about voicemail. I'm going to shift gears here and talk about email first, and then get back to voicemail. Email, of course, is a relatively new form of communication, although it may not seem that way to you. But it really hasn't been around that long, and so the techniques of how to use email are still evolving. The standard approach is to, well, first of all, let me back up. The structure of email, we all know, an email header has three fields: a from field, which is automatically populated by your computer. A date and time sent field, which is also automatically filled in, and then a subject field, which we get to populate when we're writing the email. We can put anything in there that we want. And an important thing to keep in mind is that when you're trying to reach someone who's busy and you send them an email, what your email is going to be doing is going to be competing for their attention with quite a few other emails that they receive in the course of a day. You know, a busy person might get easily 100 emails in a day, and really no one can effectively respond to 100 emails. So what busy people do, and probably this applies to most of us as well, is they practice a sort of email triage, where when they come back from lunch and there's another 30 emails that have come in since they were out having lunch, the first thing they do is they scan the emails, they scan the headers to see if they're looking at the from field. And so any email from their boss or important customer or their spouse, that one gets attention right away. So they read those, they take some kind of action, either respond or send them on or whatever they do. And then they get down to the second level of emails that are not from people who they recognize. And the way that they sort these, I would argue, is by looking at the subject, and a subject that appears to be important, will get more attention than a subject that appears to be unimportant. And a subject that piques their curiosity is more likely to get attention than one that does not. So, so the message here is to treat your subject line as the one chance that you've got to pique the curiosity of the person you're trying to reach. So instead of the normal approach here, I'm in paragraph 2, where you fill a subject field with a descriptive label that you haven't given very much attention to. Instead of that, think of the subject line as a headline in your newspaper. And if you look at your newspaper, a lot of thought goes into the headlines that appear, especially on the front page. And why is that? Well, the reason is because a lot of newspapers still get sold off of newsstands in airports and on street corners where people are simply walking by and glancing around, and a headline that piques their curiosity is much more likely to sell the newspaper than one that does not, or no headline at all. So that's where this thinking comes from, and it works pretty well in newspapers. It can also work pretty well in email. Don't miss your chance to use this one opportunity to get the attention of the person you're trying to reach. So what I recommend is don't fill in the subject field until you've written the message. Write the message, boil it down, make it concise, make it hard-hitting, make it certainly grammatically correct, make it very curiosity-inducing, and then find one of the curiosity-inducing phrases in your message and simply cut and paste that into the subject line. And that way, the subject line will be both congruent with the message that you're sending, and it will also be effective at eliciting curiosity. It doesn't hurt to add ellipsis. That's 3 little dots, which implies at the end of the subject that there's more to come. There's more to come. What this will do, hopefully, when the person you're trying to reach reads it, is they will read your subject. They will be so curious that they will want to see more. That they want to see the rest of the message, and to do that, they have to click on the message and read it. Okay, so that gets you. I mean, that doesn't score a home run, but it does at least get you to first base. And without that, you're unlikely to be successful. If you can't get the addressee to actually open the email and read it, then it's very unlikely to be read later, and it's likely to have no effect. It's likely to be a waste of time. A couple things to remember here. Don't pick a subject line that has no relation to the body of your text. You might think of something that's very curiosity-inducing, but it's unrelated. So the reader will open your message, but find that the subject line that doesn't have any connection, and they'll feel tricked. And that's both not very effective, but it's also not a very good way to initiate a relationship. Keep in mind, an email is easily forwarded both inside and outside the target's organization, and it can last forever. So be careful what you write, so that it's not something that will be potentially embarrassing to you later, or something that would be ineffective if forwarded to somebody else within the other person's organization. I try to never send my first draft, and I've been writing emails now for longer than some of you have been alive, and I'm still not good enough at it to write a first draft and send it off. It's always got mistakes in it, sometimes blatant grammatical mistakes, but there's always ways that it can be improved. And what I try to do is to write the email and set it aside for at least an hour, and then come back to it with fresh eyes, not remembering exactly what I was trying to say or what I meant. And I always see ways to improve what I've written, to make it more meaningful, to make it punchier, to make it less subject to misunderstanding. So try really hard to not be in such a hurry that you need to send off an email right away without having enough time to review it. Another thing that is not on this page is that your email, your initial email to someone, in order to be read, needs to be fairly short. I think a lot of people do what I do, which is to have the email headers appear in the top of the page and to have the body of the selected text appear in the bottom. When I get an email from someone I don't know, I will look at the text before I even read it, look at it to see how long it is. If it's short, there's a good chance I'll read it right now rather than having to remember to come back to it. But if it's long, if it spills off the bottom of the page, then I'm much less likely to read it, at least right that moment. I may come back to it, or I may mean to come back to it and sometimes forget, but I'm not as likely to read it right at that moment as I am if it's short enough that I can see I can read this email in 60 seconds and be done with it. So your initial email, it's important to keep it short and concise so that it can be easily read by this busy person. And any questions on any of this? Okay.
I have a question. Is it, you know, does that include links to other pages, or what can you say briefly about essentially providing the other content via a link that they can click on?
I think used carefully, that's okay. And the good thing about that, obviously, is that it doesn't make your email so long that there's a disincentive to read it. And that's the main thing that I'm trying to accomplish by saying keep your email short. The link or an attachment can serve the same purpose, and you can use verbiage like, for more information on this particular subject, please click here, or I've attached a document that explains this in greater detail, something like that. But that allows you to keep your email nice and short and concise. However, if I get an initial email and it's got 6 links in it, I'm put off. You know, I'm feeling overwhelmed by information that I haven't asked for. So it's okay to do that with 1 or 2, but it loses its effectiveness if you overdo it.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, I'll move on. When I'm teaching this in a day-long class, we stop at this point and we all write out a practice email, and then we critique one another's work. And this is a very productive part of the session, but we don't have time to do that here. So I recommend this to you as a homework after we've finished. It turns out that with a little practice, you really can improve your email technique, and your batting average in getting a response goes way up. Okay, let's talk about voicemail. Voicemail is not used as much as it was even 5 years ago because of the increasing tendency to digital communication, and that hasn't seemed to show any sign of reversing anytime soon. But you never know. We might get to the point where voicemail once again becomes more valued as we all get more and more overwhelmed with digital communications. Another thing I would suggest to you about voicemail is if you're trying to reach a busy person who's hard to reach, and the whole rest of the world is attempting to do that using email, using voicemail is a way to stand out. You know, it does make you look different. And if a busy person that's getting hundreds of emails a day might only be getting tens or dozens of voicemails a day. So in that sense, your odds of success could be higher. So I recommend to you putting some effort into mastering a voicemail technique as well. And as I pointed out earlier, when you do call a busy person, particularly with caller ID, you're very unlikely to get through to the live human the first time. So having a good voicemail technique is essential and very productive. So here's a conventional voicemail structure. When it goes to beep, you say, here's who I am and here's why I'm calling you. which in conventional instruction sometimes includes an elevator pitch, but which I believe, and I'll explain why, is not the best way to go about it. And then say, please return my call, and here's my phone number. So that's how most of us do it. Now, I want to take a couple minutes now, again, not as long as I usually do, but if 2 or 3 of you would volunteer to read your voicemail that you wrote, 20 minutes ago, we'll all listen quietly, and then we'll talk about it. So could I have a couple of volunteers, please? Well, it looks like we're shy this morning. So in the interest of moving this along, let me share with you some of the typical voicemails that I've heard in teaching my course. Usually they go something like this. Hello, Mr. Smith. This is Jim Russell calling. I'm with the Laidlaw Transportation Company, and we are the largest and the most successful student transportation company in the country. We have the highest renewal rate and the best safety performance of any. I'd appreciate the chance to talk with you about your student transportation needs. When you have a moment, could you please return my call? My phone number is 206-782-6666. And, if you don't have time to call me, I'll follow up with you again in a couple of days. Okay, thank you very much. Bye. Okay. So I don't know if that's similar to what any of you wrote, but I'll bet there were some similarities. So, terrible voicemail, I ask, and I'll answer rhetorically. Well, I mean, it wasn't terrible in the sense that it wasn't embarrassing or it wasn't profane and it was fairly short. It didn't go on and on and on. It didn't run off beyond the 2-minute limit. So, it certainly could have been worse. However, was it the kind of voicemail that is likely to generate a reply from a busy person? And most of the time, the answer to that is, well, not really, And what things were wrong about it? Well, there were a number of things that could have been improved. I think the biggest thing that could have been improved in the voicemail that I just shared with you is that I included a little bit of an elevator pitch. I talked about my company and how what we sell is the best and the brightest, and why you'll like it if you just take the moment to learn about it. That's not a good way to use voicemail. So how can we do it better? Well, I'm going to talk about a couple of different techniques here under paragraph 3. The first is if you can use a referral, and obviously, to make it a warm call rather than a cold call. And if you can do that at all, by all means do that. So if you can launch your call by saying, "Hi, this is Jim Russell. Our mutual friend John Reynolds suggested that I call you. He thought you might be interested in," and then you go on with the rest of your voicemail. If you can use a connection that the person you're calling recognizes and presumably respects, you have a much higher average for starters, of getting the whole voicemail listened to. When busy people are screening their voicemails, or if they have a secretary doing that for them, they don't necessarily always listen all the way through the voicemail. They'll listen to the first 30 seconds, and if it's obviously something they're not interested in, star D for delete, because why take time listening to the rest of it? So the things that you have that are going to pique the person's interest and generate a return call, you need to present pretty early in the body of what you say. And if you have a referral, then that might be the single most important thing you say. Mention that person whose name that they'll recognize. So here's an example of how I used exactly that technique about 12 years ago when I was selling my marketing consulting to a shipyard here in Seattle where I live, and I was leaving a voicemail on the voicemail of the CEO of the company, whose name is Steve Welch. So I called up and I got his voicemail, sure enough, and I said, Steve, this is Jim Russell calling. I'm a principal in the Marketing Edge here in Seattle. We do strategic marketing consulting for industrial companies. John Davis knows our work and suggested I contact you about segmenting your markets. When you have a moment, please return my call at 206-782-1234. I expect to be in today until about 4:30. Again, Jim Russell, 206-782-1234. Thank you. Okay, so what's different about that voicemail? Well, first of all, it does not include an elevator pitch. It does include a description of what I do, but that's in there so that he sees the relevance of what I do to his work. But I don't say we're the biggest and the brightest and the best, because that's ultimately just ineffective. There's no way you can deliver an elevator pitch without sounding self-serving. And there may be a time to use an elevator pitch later on when you're trying to close a deal on the fourth or the fifth meeting with this person. But using it in the initial phone call is the kiss of death. So don't ever do that. A couple other things I'd point out about this technique. The first line there, Steve. I went to some trouble to find out from our mutual friend, how does this guy like to be called? You know, if you go on his website, you'll see that he's Stephen Welch, CEO of Todd Shipyards. Well, is he Stephen? Is he Stephen? Is he Steve? Is he Bobo? You know, I mean, any of those is possible. So before I called him up, I asked my friend, how does he like to be called? Well, he's Steve. Okay, fine. He might prefer to be called Mr. Welch, you know, in which case calling him Steve is not a good start. So figure out how the person likes to be called. One way to do that, interestingly, is by calling his number and getting his voicemail. Most outgoing voicemails, I mean, unless he has a secretary do it for him, will be the person you're trying to reach, who will say, hello, this is Steve Welch, and you've reached my voicemail. Okay, fine. It's Steve. It's not Stephen. It's Steve. So that's a good way to get that information. I identify myself as a principal in the Market Edge, which was the name of our little consulting company at the time. Well, I was a principal. I was one of the two people who owned the company. In fact, there were really only two people in the company. So in a sense, that was an exaggeration, but it was true. And I identified myself as a principal, so it was clear that I wasn't someone buried down in the organization who couldn't speak for the organization, which is much less likely to generate a return phone call. You know, someone working in a call center in South Dakota. I'm not that person. I'm the guy that runs the company, Steve, so that's who's calling. John Davis, our mutual friend, suggested that I contact you about segmenting your markets. My friend John Davis, who also knew Steve, happened to know that Steve was involved in a market segmentation project and would be particularly receptive to that approach. You don't always have that kind of intelligence, but when you can get it, it can be important. When you have a moment, please return my call. Very courteous way to say it. Better than saying, I'd appreciate a return phone call. I'd really like it if you'd call me back. I'd very much like to talk to you. No, don't. This is courteous. It's professional. When you have a moment, please return my call. I expect to be in today until about 4:30. What does that add? Well, here's what that adds. A couple of things. Number one, it implies that I expect your call today. I expect that this matter has enough urgency to you that you're going to want to get back in touch with me right away. So just so you know, Steve, you can do that until 4:30 today, okay? And I'm telling you that as a matter of courtesy, so that you don't call me back when I'm not here, but also to plant in your brain a little bit of urgency about making this connection. Now, what about 4:30? Does that not sound like I'm kind of cutting out of work early? I'm not staying here till at least 5 or maybe 6 or 7 at night. Well, you know what? One of the things I'm trying to communicate to Steve here is that I'm an important guy. I'm an executive just like he is. I set my own hours, and some days I work late, and other days I have other commitments and I don't work late, or at least I'm not at my phone late. And so today I'm available until 4:30. It's perfectly okay for that to be 4:30 or 2:30 or 7 o'clock in the evening. Any of those times is okay, but there's one time that's not okay, and that's 5 o'clock. Don't ever say, I'll be in my office until 5 o'clock. The reason not to say that is because that's when hourly people go home. People who punch the clock and are paid to work 40 hours a week go home at 5 o'clock. So you want to dispel any suspicion that you might be one of those people, because one of those people might not be worth the CEO of Todd Shipyards calling him back. Okay, so any time is okay except 5 o'clock. But you know, don't say I'll be here until 4:37, because that's kind of strange. So pick a round number that's not 5 o'clock and tell them that's when you're going to be there. Give your name and your phone number twice. Say it slowly. One thing to keep in mind, one reason to give it twice is, well, it's more courteous so that they don't have to rewind the voicemail to get your number. But also, if they're accessing their voicemail from a cell phone and they're driving down the road, the handoff from one cell tower to the next could take place right in the middle of you giving your phone number, and that 50 millisecond dropout is enough to eliminate one of the digits. So always give your phone number twice. So that's an example of using a referral. If you don't have a referral, then you need to work harder at piquing Steve's curiosity with one of these 4 options that we mentioned earlier. Something new and exclusive, a hint of value, partial information, and questions rather than statements. So here's an example of that where there is no John Davis here who I can use as a referral. Steve, this is Jim Russell calling. I'm at Market Edge here in Seattle. We do strategic marketing consulting for industrial companies in metropolitan Seattle. Yesterday, just after lunch, I was in a meeting with our research vice president, and Todd Shipyards came up. She's interviewed the major West Coast fleets and has developed forecast spending data for their 2015 ship maintenance budgets, and I wondered whether that might have value for Todd. When you have a minute, please return my call, and then the rest of it's the same. Okay, so look at what I've done here. I've created a bit of information that is almost certainly of interest to the person I'm calling. Now, notice also that I don't actually give that information. I don't say to them, and you might be interested that American President Lines is budgeted to spend $150 million next year. No. What I'm trying to generate here is a return phone call. So I'm giving him enough information so that he knows that he needs to talk to me, but I'm not actually giving him the information, because once I get a return phone call, then we've got a dialogue, and I can choose to share some of the specifics, or I can angle for a meeting with him, or I can angle for, which I was doing at the time, for a consulting project that he paid me for. But I could extinguish his curiosity if I gave him too much information. Okay, so this is an example of how to do that. The way to do it in your work, in your life, will be different from this, obviously, because you're not trying to sell marketing research to Todd Shipyards. But if you can work your ideas into this kind of a structure that's brief, that's punchy, that's to the point, and that piques people's curiosity, your batting average on getting a response to these kinds of voicemails will go up dramatically. Okay, move on to the next page here. Some more ideas here. When you're doing your voicemail, and actually I didn't write this down, but I should have. What I always do in this kind of circumstance, even though I've been leaving voicemails now for decades, is I write myself a text, a script rather. I write down what I'm going to say in the voicemail and how I'm going to say it. Then I rehearse it out loud. I make the words come out of my mouth, and I listen to how they sound. And always, without exception, once I've heard the words with my ears, I change the words to be something different from what I'd written down. The basic truth is that our ears hear the words very differently from the way our eyes hear the words. And a written text, verbalized, will almost always have room for improvement. So I absolutely do that all the time. And I recite out loud the text that I finally boil down and decide to use, not fewer than 5 times before I actually pick up the phone. The reason I do that is because it's a lot like fielding a ground ball, where the first time you do it, it feels less awkward. It feels more awkward than the third or the fourth or the fifth time you've done it. You know, our speaking apparatus is physical and muscular and neurological, and it just gets better with practice. So my objective is to get to the point when I actually leave the voicemail that it sounds completely natural. It does not sound scripted, but it's exactly what I want to say in terms of being succinct and punchy with the right tone of voice, the right length, which, by the way, I think is, if you're over 40 seconds, you're too long. And the way I do that is, as I say, by scripting and rehearsing the script. Okay. Some suggestions here. Don't fail to mention the compelling reason that you're calling, and if you're having trouble thinking of a compelling reason, then maybe you shouldn't be calling. Okay, and that's another mistake that's commonly made in sales organizations, is just calling people up without really having very much to talk about. Don't do that. It's self-defeating. The form of address for the person you're calling. That's what I mentioned earlier, but find out how this person likes to be addressed. Some people will prefer to be called Mr. or Mrs. or Doctor or Professor. It's very helpful to find that out in advance and to use the right approach. Being brief and specific, when you'll be into. Okay. Oh, the final bullet. A lot of people will say, and if you don't have time to call me back, I'll call you up next Tuesday, or I'll follow up with a voicemail. You know, as soon as a busy person hears that, it's star D, delete, because what that says is, I don't need to bother returning this person's call. They'll call me again. You know, I'm on to the next thing because I'm busy. So don't ever do that. Now, it's perfectly okay to actually call them again next Tuesday if they don't respond, but don't tell them that you're going to do that, because that just gives them a reason to not respond. Some more thoughts here on both email and voicemail. These clever tricks about getting through to people on the phone, I mentioned this a little bit before, are largely obsolete or even inappropriate, like calling people at home. So don't do that. Just recognize that a good voicemail strategy is essential if you really are ever going to get in touch with important people who you don't already know. Again, it's not just in selling; it's in organizations. It's throughout life. What do you do if a gatekeeper answers? What do you do if, against all odds, someone picks up the phone and identifies, usually herself, and says, you know, I take so and so's calls. How can I help you? Well, and here you are sitting with a well-prepared voicemail ready to go. You're not really prepared to deal with a gatekeeper whose job it is to keep you away from the important person. Well, the first thing to do is to ask to go to your target's voicemail, to say, hey, does Mr. Jones have a voicemail box that I could get into? I could leave him a message. And sometimes they'll let you do that. They'll just patch you through, and away you go. You're in. Sometimes they will say, well, actually, I'm his voicemail, so please allow me to help with you. And at that point, you're a little bit stuck. The formula there is to have something else ready that will make the gatekeeper want to put you in the target's voicemail box. And I'm going to flip ahead to the. Let's see. I'm sorry, I didn't include that. But let me read to you the sort of thing that you might do, or recite to you the kind of thing that you might do. You might say, well, you know, what I have is a little bit complex for him. It's a follow-up on a conversation that we had before, or whatever the situation is. but but have something complex enough in mind to say to the gatekeeper something along the lines of, well, you know, if you could please tell him that our 32 picometer system with the remote 0-degree chiller, the one he asked about at the trade show in Las Vegas, is available, but in a slightly different configuration from the 629-4 model that he's familiar with. The revised configuration incorporates the Johnson NanoWafer technology that he knows from his work. So anyway, the point is to get specific and complex so that the gatekeeper will be afraid of possibly misinterpreting all that, getting some of the information wrong, and will say to you, hold on, let me just put you in his voicemail, and that's what you want. But if that happens, keep in mind that that person probably also screens the voicemails, and so be careful, number one, not to make any reference to the person you just talked to about, I had this bad experience with your secretary, so I'm in your voicemail box now. But also make sure that the message you ultimately leave is similar to what you sort of threatened the gatekeeper with. So that's a fine point. Getting back to the mainstream voicemail stuff, practice is indispensable, and I talked about this. Write it down, edit it, practice it out loud, keep refining it. Something that I recommend when people are sort of novices at this is when you think you've got a really good voicemail, call yourself up, and of course you'll get your own voicemail box because you're on the phone, right? And leave the voicemail message for yourself, and then let it sit overnight, and come back and listen to it the next day, and ask yourself, is that a compelling voicemail? Is that as good as it could be, or is there room in there for additional refinement? And almost always there's room for additional refinement. And when you think you have it as good as you can get it, then get your colleagues involved and leave them voicemail messages and get their feedback. If you have a boss, get your boss involved in it. There isn't a substitute for rehearsal, and one of the problems, one of the challenges when I teach professional sales teams is that a lot of salespeople, the sales culture is not one of terrific self-discipline, and these people are often inclined to think, you know, I'm a pretty smart guy. I speak English pretty well. I don't like practicing. I don't need to rehearse this. I'll just go out and wing it, you know, and depend on my gift of gab, and that just doesn't work. They end up never getting very good at this, and there just isn't any substitute for rehearsal. I don't know if you know the 10,000 hours rule, but it comes out of music education, and the thinking is that until you spend 10,000 hours practicing the piano or the violin or the guitar, you're really not going to get very good at it, and you just have to invest the time and do the practice. Well, I'm not going to say that you need 10,000 hours of practice on voicemail, but you do need some practice. You do need out loud spoken rehearsal, or you just won't get very good. When should you choose email versus voicemail? Well, there are certainly industry preferences, and in software is one of the industries that really likes email, so that might be the way you'd go first. Consider the likely availability and the work habits of your target. You might, if you have enough information to know when they do their email, when they do their voicemail, if you happen to know when they're going to be traveling and might be away from the phone, that all plays into it. But also consider when it might be useful to do something that's just different from the common practice. Again, consider a busy person that gets 100, 150 emails in a day, but might only get 10 or 12 voicemails in a day. If you're one of the 150, your odds might not be as good as they would be if you were one of the 12. You know, so keep that in mind. Remember that both emails and voicemails may be pre-screened by an assistant. They're very durable. They can be forwarded both inside and outside the company. So be mindful of all that when you prepare your emails and voicemails. People say, what's the best approach, or what do you do first? Well, what I typically do, and I'm not working in a primarily digital industry at the moment, but what I typically do is I lead with a voicemail. I'll prepare a voicemail, I'll call it in, I'll leave it, and then a couple of days later, if I haven't gotten a response, I'll call again with exactly the same voicemail, and I don't make reference to I called you 3 days ago and you didn't respond, so I'm calling again. I don't do that. I simply leave the same voicemail, and then normally what happens, this is what we hope happens, is that the busy person hears the second identical voicemail, probably intended to respond to the first voicemail because it was such a spectacular voicemail, right? But just didn't get around to it, and now is a little bit embarrassed that they didn't get around to it, and so they'll pick up the phone or have someone else call me back pretty quickly, and that works very often. If that second voicemail doesn't generate a response, then I will send them an email a couple of days later, and in the email I'll mention I haven't been able to reach you by phone, so I'm trying this email, and that often gets a result too. If in your industry, which is probably more digital than mine, you might want to reverse that approach. Send an email first. A couple of days later, send the identical email. No mention of I sent you this before. If that doesn't generate a response, then follow up with a voicemail. Another thing to consider for someone who's particularly hard to get is that you could send them a letter. Send them a letter on a piece of paper and an envelope with a stamp. This isn't done much anymore, so there's a pretty high probability that it'll at least get read. Might not generate a response, no guarantee, but it'll at least get read, which there's no guarantee of that with email or even with voicemail. Now, using these techniques will dramatically escalate our callback batting average, but there are still going to be cases where the person you're trying to reach doesn't respond. And the reason for that, 9 times out of 10, is because they don't want to. They may just be too busy now. It might be something they're not interested in, even with your curiosity piquing techniques. So what I advise is to respect that and consider a different approach. Try something later when they might have more time. Try or when you think situations have changed, then they might be more receptive to your call. Maybe there's someone else in the organization who you can target and reach and get a better result. But don't just keep hammering away at a person who has had a chance to respond to you and has chosen not to. At least give it a breather for weeks or a month. John, I see we're slightly over the 60-minute allotted time here. I could go on, but I don't want to disrespect your schedule here. So, what shall we do?
Well, let's. I see that a couple of folks have had to leave. Why don't we pause for any questions, and then Jim, if you can stay, why don't you complete your presentation for those who can stay beyond the hour. So if anybody who has to leave has some questions, let's give them a chance to do that right now, and then we can resume. Make sense?
Good for me.
And I see that Devon has he shared with us his voicemail message. Can you see that on the chat?
Just a moment.
Yeah, while you look, I'll invite anybody to ask questions. It's basically, click on the little flower down below.
Oh.
Yeah, there you go. And it should bring up your panel on the right, and there's a little sub panel called chat where everybody's kind of commenting. Anyway, I can read it to you if you like.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is Devon, and pardon me. So here's his email. Hello, I understand you're a busy man, but I hope this message finds you well. Actually, Devon, could you read it for us?
Sorry about that. I was at work here. Excuse me. Hello, I understand that you're a busy man, but I hope this message finds you well. I am currently seeking insight from an individual of your expertise as to how to correctly approach your company for a possible position in the future as soon as my training is complete and have acquired a Salesforce admin certification. If you are free at any time, sir, please give me a call at, blah, 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 blah. Ms. Devon Smith, and it would be an honor to speak with you. Again, my number is blah, 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 blah. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Devon, I presume you wrote that at the beginning of our session. Now that we've had a chance to talk about this technique a little bit, how would you critique your own message? Are there any things in there that you would change, delete, add? What do you think?
Again, I guess you can never really stop critiquing this and revamping it as much as you. It's just, it depends on what you're doing. Your current state of what message are you trying to get across, and I'm just going off of what's in my heart, and my mind right now. That I'm trying to speak with some knowledgeable people out there. I don't have anything more, anything less at this time. Ask me a couple days from now, and this message will change, of course. But
yeah, well, can I make a couple of suggestions to you? This is a nice message. It's professional. There's certainly nothing embarrassing here or incorrect. But I think there would be a couple of things here that you might say that would give the message more urgency and also make the respondent more curious. For one thing, you might mention that you're a veteran in a training program that is going to position you to be a Salesforce administrator or whatever the right title is, and you're looking for guidance from experts in that field as to how you might best orient your career. A couple of things in that kind of message that you didn't get in what you've said here. Number one, you're a veteran. This is a pretty good time in America to be a veteran looking for a job or looking for advice. There's a lot of sympathy, correctly so, for veterans that hasn't always been the case in our country. So I would suggest don't miss a chance to mention that. Another hot button is Salesforce. You're currently in a training program at the end of which you'll be a Salesforce administrator, and you don't need to get bogged down in too many specifics about I'll be there. Here's the process. First, there's step one, step two. So just say at the end of the program I'll be a Salesforce administrator. I'm looking for some counsel on how I might best orient my career. Something that that I didn't realize when I was younger is that as people get older, and I'm about as old as John, so John and I can remember when dirt was invented, but one of the things that happens as you get older is you really value the opportunity to be able to contribute to a young person's wisdom and understanding in life, because we all remember when we were 25 or 30, we thought we knew everything, and boy, we were so ignorant, we were almost dangerous, and so someone of our advanced age is really welcomes the chance to help a younger person avoid some of the mistakes that we made, and so I would include that in my message, that I'm calling senior people. I'm looking for guidance on how I might best orient my career, plan my professional advancement. There are a number of ways you could say that, but the message would be the same.
that is great insight. I've never looked at it that way. My background, I just want to be as humble as possible. I mean, to mention all of that, yes, it is to sell yourself, but, just come across as a decent human being that wants to get in touch with somebody is how I've been told to do it. But if that is what helps, then by all means I will use it. And thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, you certainly come across as humble, very self-effacing, and that's great. That's wonderful. But if the person you're trying to reach is really pretty busy, that might not be enough. Whereas the fact that you're a veteran and you're doing Salesforce, you're not just out there in the market trying to think, well, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? You've got a direction. And you're going to come out of this program with a valuable skill, but you're interested in getting more guidance than that, so that you can make the best use of your gifts. That'll come across and be very appealing to the right kind of person.
Understood. Hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
So, we should probably, Jim, let you, wrap up unless there's other questions right now, and then we can, I am recording this, and I will post it in Chatter, the link, so that you can review the parts you weren't able to attend.
Okay, well, shall I wrap up then, John?
Yeah, I think that would be good, and then we can.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, let me do that.
By the way, thank you.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
Go ahead. No, I was just thanking Devon for sharing his email and allowing us to discuss the example. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. Moving on to the next page here, I've suggested some homework for you. The one is the guess what thing that I mentioned earlier. Number two, the email and the voicemail techniques are something that you're not going to perfect overnight. It'll take some time and some practice. And if you find yourself in a circumstance where you're routinely doing emails and voicemails, as I do probably 5 or 6 or 7 each day outgoing. So I've got a built-in practice regimen. But if you find yourself not doing that, then I suggest that you try to schedule yourself a little time once each week, write out an email message and a voicemail message, and work with them. Recite the voicemail message out loud, boil it down, perfect it, leave it for yourself, and see how it sounds the next day. The email message, send it to yourself and see how it reads the next day. And over a period of months and years, you'll get to where you're really pretty facile at this, and it will not be frightening to you at all to have to get in touch with somebody. And frankly, the frightening part is what keeps a lot of people from moving ahead in their careers. The person or people they need to talk to, they just don't know how to get in touch with them, and they're afraid to try. So these skills are worth developing, and frankly, not just for professional reasons. I use these skills all the time with my friends in my church, with my family. They simply make you a more effective communicator, and they're valuable. Number 5, I suggest writing down references and memorizing the names, their email addresses, and phone numbers. And I use the word customer here, which is more sales oriented. But when you go out looking for work, as you get interviews, informational interviews, or real job interviews, one of the questions that will come up is, could you please give us some references? And it's much more impressive to be able to recite those from memory than it is to say, well, I'll get back to you, or let me think about who that would be, and I'll let you know. If you can just respond verbally, here are the names and the contact information of people who are my references. That's a very impressive technique. So that's what I suggest for homework. The next page, if you're really interested in how all this stuff came to be, here are some books that you could read that constitute, for better or worse, the literature on selling and sales training. A couple of them I think are particularly good, and I've asterisked those. But if you get to where you want to just thoroughly learn this field, these are the books I'd recommend. Last page is about me. Bottom of the page is my email address. If you think of questions that you didn't think of here during the call today, please feel free to shoot me an email. If you'd like me to critique your emails, your draft emails or your voicemails, please get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to do that. So I'm at your disposal. As John said, I'm a vet, and I'm proud of that, and grateful that we have such selfless, wonderful people who are still interested in service. So I feel like I have a big debt to all of you. So please avail yourself of me if I can help you at all. And that's it.
Jim, that's thank you so much. It was really I've heard this version of this before, and I always learn. I learned a ton myself. So many thanks. I don't know if you've been following the chat or the comments, but they've been universally very appreciative and positive for what you have shared with us today. So again, thank you. If there are any final questions, we can field those. And another comment from Nick, also expressing thanks. Any?
Well, it was a great pleasure. Thank you for carving time out of your schedule to be with me.
Jim, thank you again. Really appreciate it. As I said to everybody, I will be posting the link on the recording. And Jim, I know he means it when he says, contact him if you have any questions or follow up. Okay, Jim, thank you again. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend. And don't forget to remember, those who served and sacrificed.
Thanks, Jim. And as always, thanks, John.
You bet, Nick. All right, guys, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.